Okay. Hey guys, what's up? It's your boy, um, Skinny Penis. But today is Tuesday, July 14th. It is 90 fucking degrees outside, Fahrenheit. And excuse me, where I am it's about to rain. So we're gonna see how well this stream goes. Usually the signal doesn't go out when it's storming. Hopefully it doesn't go out when it's storming. But we'll see how it goes. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. How we're starting with just chatting because there are some things that I want to talk about. Um, I usually do current events, and then we're going to watch a cool video because there was an analysis video that I was putting off watching because I've just been busy and I want to be able to do it while my mind is calm. And I think there's a way to like excuse me, bridge topics together. I'm so sorry I'm coughing. Let us pray. Plus, I also think that if we watch a video together, then that'll put a lot less strain on my voice. So that'll help. But how's everybody doing? Pretty much. Part of the reason why I'm talking about the topics that I'm going to cover, mainly just two things: A Knight of the Seven Kingdom and Sea China, is because I think that in a very strange and unconventional way, these two topics go well together. For starters, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, which is a Game of Thrones spinoff based off of a book called The Hedge Knight, which is also by George R. R. Martin. It recently got nominated for Emmys. And if anybody follows my Twitter, I've been really excited for that news. Cause oh my god, I love that show so much. Like the show came out in the winter, but I didn't have time to really watch it because I had other stuff to do and I was kind of hesitant on getting back into Game of Thrones because I was really let me tell you about how I became a Game of Thrones fan. My mom was watching it because um we had HBO for free for I think for 2 weeks because she was paying for a Roku subscription. And so she ended up watching that, and then sometimes I would show up in the living room and watch snippets of it. I loved Oberyn Martell. Like I watched his entire arc and stuff, and I fell in love with him only for him to be whisked away by George killing people. And I'm like, damn, I want to cry. But Game of Thrones, I genuinely got into Game of Thrones and I ended up watching the entirety of it in at the beginning of college, only to be disappointed. And then a false perception that people often talk about is that, oh, Game of Thrones is bad with the last two seasons. No, it wasn't bad starting at season what, 7? It was bad starting at season 5. So I pretty much say if you really want to get into the show, started and then ended at the end of season 4 because those were like the best 4 seasons of writing, and that was mainly because George was on there. And you go from there. But the reason why I didn't want to get bothered with the spinoffs, like the other one was House of the Dragon, and I really didn't care for it because even though Daenerys is a really cool character, the Targaryens as a family, I don't particularly care for because they're like a bunch of conquerors and shit. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's just like I don't I don't care necessarily enough about Targaryen lore to want to get into them and stuff. Like I don't care about the plight of the Targaryens because I think that is very much deserved, even though unfortunately Daenerys was like a victim of the aftermath. But like fuck that family and stuff. This is an anti Targaryen household. We stand the Andals and the First Men. But plus when I saw them black people in those dry ass wigs, I really didn't want to get into it because I'm like, huh, you didn't have black people in Westeros before, and then when you do add us, you give us dry wigs. And I feel like that's like disingenuous as a form of inclusion, because if you're going to put us in there, at least make us look right. And then apparently the writing has been adjusted where the now race bended characters who are black aren't even getting the same amount of meat in their storytelling and stuff. They're being neglected, which is very, it's just ass. And that's like a whole other conversation about like retroactive representation and how there are like so many terrible ways to execute it. But and there are good ways to execute it. It's just that a lot of people aren't trying. So when A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms came out, I ended up getting into it like maybe a little bit after I ended my Curse of Strahd campaign, because like I just started going through a phase where I was really, really into knights. Because I've talked about Curse of Strahd a couple of times on stream, how it was a cipher campaign with Basil not the herb, and how my character started off as a sniper and then ended up becoming a knight. And I just ended up pretty much on a knight phase. So I was getting back into A Knight's Tale, which is a whole other thing. That's a film starring Heath Ledger, and it's about this guy named William Thatcher who's a peasant knight, and he's trying to eat and make sure that his friends can eat. So he ends up joining the local joust and stuff in order to get some money, but then he ends up developing an ambition beyond that, right? He wants to be a knight, period. And he ends up getting roped up in like some noble bullshit because he ends up falling for a noble. And then he ends up beefing with another noble who's actually trying to court that same noble and stuff. And a lot of stuff ends up ensuing from that. And in a lot of ways, the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, it's similar with the premise. It focuses on Dunk, who is later known in history as Sir Duncan the Tall because he's tall as shit. Oh my god. And he's also a peasant knight. In the lore of Game of Thrones, they're called a hedge knight because one, they're peasants, and two, they don't have a lord to serve under. So they're pretty much like on demand, or they like go from lord to lord. They're just passed around like a blunt, right? And he's also poor, and he's hoping to go to attorney and compete in there so he can win a challenge and get something to eat. And then he ends up getting attached to this little boy who's um who's roped up in some shit with the other nobles. And then so it's the same premise, but it's just like very different execution. And I love the show so much. I've been singing his praises on my private account, but now I'm trying to be more open because I want to get into the habit of like being of openly praising things, because I don't want to be known for just, being negative and crotchety all the time. And also, it's nice. I want people to know about the show, and I want them to have a good time because I had a good time watching it. A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is a really fun show and it's very heartfelt. It, for those who really care about adaptational accuracy and stuff, it's very close, because the showrunner, I think his name is Ira Chamberlain, he worked closely with George R. R. Martin, and unlike the showrunners for Game of Thrones and half of House of the Dragons, he actually cares about George's input. And then let's talk about that for a minute. Um when it comes to adaptational accuracy, I think that it is an irrational expectation, because film and books are very different mediums, and there are some types of information not necessarily can only be portrayed in the medium that it's in, because I don't think that. I feel like that's a inaccessible take to have. But like, when you consider things like logistics, then sometimes you have to make sacrifice, or sometimes you have to make adjustments, right? But given that so many famous filmmakers, they do take inspiration from great fiction and from reading and whatnot, it's kind of important to actually give a damn about the source material, especially when the goal of making an adaptation is not just to draw new people into the franchise, but also to please the people that are already there. And that's from like a business standpoint. But also like the point of an adaptation is to give tribute to the thing that inspired you in the first place. And it feels like the showrunners have a lot of contempt for the source material, thinking that they can write better than George. And I'm not saying that George doesn't have any flaws as a writer, because he definitely does. I think that even though he's really good at characterizing women, like he treats them like people when it comes to physical descriptions, sometimes they can be really disrespectful. Like sometimes he's still an old ass white man, and he do be writing some she breasted bobbly down the stairs type beat. But the woman who breasts bobbly, she at least has a personality and goals, and like she's very painted as sympathetic when it comes to her victimization and stuff, because women do be getting put through the ringer because this war and shit and patriarchy. And George seems to give a fuck about these issues and stuff. But like he's definitely flawed. There's a lot of issues with like racist writing and the Orientalism, especially when it comes to literally anything in Essos. And I'm not gonna get into that. So there's much to be improved, but overall, I think that George is a decent writer and he has a love for history. And it's also a blessing to make an adaptation of a big piece and have the writer who is still alive to like give you some pointers or give you some input, especially when George isn't just great as a novelist, he's also great as a screenwriter, because a lot of the episodes from Game of Thrones that won Emmys were written solely or co-written by him with the scripts. I think it was like the Battle of the Blackwater or something. That episode that happened during the War of the Five Kings. George wrote that episode and that ended up winning an award. So like take advantage of the resources that are given to you and have respect for the thing that you're adapting. Like don't get paid to write shitty fanfic. I don't know. I don't know. But we're getting to A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. One of the scenes that stand out a lot to me the most um was actually the scenes between, and this is a spoiler warning, right? Um for A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. There are scenes where Dunk or Sir Duncan is going around interacting with the small folk, because he's small folk himself and he's like going through it right now. And he's trying to find a lord who will give him some favor in order to like verify that he was a knight, because the person who knighted him didn't have any witnesses at the time. And, he's trying to join this tourney so he could get something to eat and not fucking starve. And when he gets there, there are some local prostitutes. And I'm going to say prostitutes because like I'm being very specific. Sex work is a good category. Is a good word to describe a category of work, but that doesn't necessarily specify what role that person is playing in that category, right? Because there's a huge difference between a stripper, a prostitute, and camp girl. These are prostitutes, right? That were hired for the tourney to entertain the local lords. And they kind of make fun of Duncan because it's just like he looks awkward and he has no equipment and stuff. He's got no drip, he's got no money. But they're like light handed. It's not exactly mean, but it's just like, bro, what are you doing here? And they also make comments about how they're really not all that different, because a prostitute has to put her body on the line in order to entertain these lords, sleeping with who knows how many clients and doing their requests at any cost just to make sure you have food on the table, versus a knight who is selling his body but it's more in the physical sense because like you're throwing your life on the line in order to protect these lords. But you can also die for their entertainment too because these tourneys are dangerous as shit. And if you don't have like any money or whatever and you get terribly injured, it's over. So, and that stood out to me because I have a character from Curse of Strahd who's like a knight, but she has a dance background and she used to work at a at an opera house. And if anybody knows about like the Paris dance companies and the opera houses there back in the day, it also doubled as a brothel of sorts because patrons could pay to get a night with a ballerina, and it wasn't like an idol meet and greet. Like they were fucking them girls, and some of them were really young and stuff. There was a lot of sexual exploitation that used to happen in the Paris opera houses back in the day. So me having a character who is going into knighthood because of like some ancient artifact that she got in touch with and it put her in this magical order of knights, but she has experience in this setting where um where prostitution is very common and stuff. It made me think of that, and it also made me think of some of the other moments of commentary when it comes to the differences in how women are treated for putting their bodies on the line for survival versus how men are treated. Knights, even though they're disposable, they get honored, they're given prestige and whatnot. Whereas when you're a sex worker, and especially a female sex worker, you're met with a lot of, ire, like you're blamed for people's lust, and whatever happens to you on the job is seen as deserving instead of as a workplace hazard to be carried, to be covered, well, to be addressed and fixed. And apparently a YouTuber ended up making an analysis video about this sort of dichotomy. I haven't watched it yet because I wanted to wait until this stream to watch it. So we're going to watch it together and we're going to commentate on it and stuff, or I'm going to commentate on it. And we'll see how it goes because I love that somebody else noticed that dichotomy and whatnot, and I'm glad that more people are going to talk about it. So let me turn off this music and then we'll switch over. So this is by YouTuber Hollybean, and the video is called "The Price of Pledging Your Body in a Song of Ice and Fire." That's the name of the franchise and stuff. Actually, let me change the screen orientation a little bit so you can see the whole thing. Okay, let's go.
With House of the Dragon coming out, I am left to reminisce about the winter in which A Night of the Seven Kingdoms came out, and all the ways that it impressed me, especially with its show-only scenes. I'm admittedly pretty critical of the A Song of Ice and Fire adaptations because, well, we've really seen showrunners get it wrong. But
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways, I think Ira Parker really gets it right.
Oh,
The
Ira
scene I want to
Parker.
focus on today is the trio of sex workers and their scene with Dunk. You might hear me calling them camp followers or brothel workers throughout the video, but what I mean is sex workers. The three women I'm talking about are Beanie, Rowan, and Leah the Lovely. Fun fact, they never actually name Beanie or Leah the Lovely by name, and they only name Rowan in the finale. And the even more interesting thing is that when you looked on IMDb for their names pre the finale, Rowan was called Red. And the interesting thing is that Rowan's actress is named Rowan, so I don't know if that was a coincidence or they did that on purpose, and I don't think anyone really cares except for me, and it has no bearing on the YouTube video. Beanie, Rowan, and Leah the Lovely are in service of Manfred Dondarrion for most of the show. And I really love the added focus that Ira Parker gives to these women that are not even in the original story. Rowan has a line to Dunk in the first episode that has stuck with me this entire time. It's one where she draws the line between her profession and his knighthood. It must put its body at hazard for the pleasure of strangers. It's just, fuck, it's so good. And
Mm-hmm.
ever since I heard it, I have not been able to get it out of my head. And the larger implications that it serves, especially in Dunk's expanding story. So, spoiler alert for Dunk's story, especially The Sworn Sword, which is going to be season 2. So there's a long-running theme in A Song of Ice and Fire that who you pledge your body to is whose side you are on, for better or for worse. The story of Dunk and Egg is set as the first Blackfire Rebellion is coming to an end, and the still glowing embers of rebellion serves as a set piece for this kind of odd pair. In A Sworn Sword, Dunk pledges himself to Osgray and joins his cause against Rohan Weber, only to learn that things are not as simple as he thought they were, and he's pretty much chosen the wrong side. And he hitched himself to a losing horse. And beyond that, he doesn't even really fucking like the guy. Osgray was a Blackfire supporter, meaning that he would have seen Egg and his family kicked out of power and maybe even killed. He goes out of his way to say some pretty weird things about women, the Dornish, and Daeron's lack of abs, which has led to some pretty great memes, but still. This support is a direct threat to Egg, and stands against what Dunk believes in. After meeting Rohan and learning the full story, Dunk again not only disagrees with Osgray, but doesn't really like him after this meeting. Yet Dunk believes in knighthood, and he believes in honor. So despite Dunk not agreeing with him, he still fights for him because he pledged himself to him. And he almost fucking dies for this guy because Dunk swore to serve him. Dunk's struggle with knighthood is not uncommon in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's a common thread shared between Barristan, Jaime, Brienne, and Sandor. And yes, I know Sandor and
Mm-hmm.
Brienne are not technically knights, but neither is Dunk, so just stick with me. Side note, when do you think Dunk gets knighted? Do you think it's when he becomes one of the Kingsguard? I think that would be interesting. But these 4 characters in the modern time of A Song of Ice and Fire serve as a perfect gradient of knighthood, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Barristan believed so strongly in knighthood.
Also, fun fact. So, for those who are unaware, or for those who may have been into Game of Thrones but don't know exactly who Dunk is, he, at least according to George in interviews, he's the ancestor of Brienne. And you can tell because they're tall, they're both tall as fuck, and they tend to share similar ideals when it comes to knighthood, like their dedication to it. Of course, Brienne, she adds a different perspective because she is a woman who is struggling in the field, but it's they share core personalities, and I really like the casting that went into the film. I can't remember what's the name of the of Dunk's actor. Give me just a minute because I'm trying to be, because I know who Gwendolyn Christie is, because y'all know that I really love fashion and stuff, and Gwendolyn Christie is a model as well, and she's been in so many other pieces of media that I like Sandman and stuff. Peter Claffey, Claffey, I'm not British. Oh, it's Irish. Peter Claffey, maybe he's the actor who plays this Dunk, and looking at them, oh my god, they look related. They look related. Like it was so good, good casting.
And sticking by his oath that he lost himself along the way, standing idly by as Aerys, Robert, and Joffrey did as they pleased. When he is stripped of his position at the end of A Game of Thrones, he goes off to Essos, and Barristan finds his purpose again in knighthood through Daenerys. And he's going to spend the rest of the books kind of trying to redeem himself for standing idly by in his passivity. Jaime, on the other hand, is quickly disillusioned with knighthood, especially when he sees what it means to be a Kingsguard. We read about the scene where he is shocked hearing the abuse that happens to Rhaella by Aerys, but he's forced to stand idly by because his job is to protect the king. not to protect the queen against the king. Jaime wears the title, but he abandons his vows pretty much as quickly as he gets them. He must relearn knighthood through Brienne and find a cause worth fighting for beyond redemption and his future. Brienne was a member of Renly's Rainbow Guard, but was never formally knighted. She's never been allowed the same privileges as Jaime, Barristan, Sandor, or even Dunk by her being a woman. Brienne, in my opinion, is the truest knight that the series has to offer. And I think we're going to see these virtues being tested through further interactions with Jaime and Lady Stoneheart to come. Brienne's
Mm-hmm.
chapters also show us many knights who pervert.
How do I describe it? So Lady Stoneheart is a character who shows up. She's a book only character because, like I said, gaps in translation, or not in translation, in adaptation. And also I feel like David and Daniel didn't really care for some of the weird mysticism that would go on that wasn't attached to like quote unquote main characters, even though Catelyn Stark was like a face character. Lady Stoneheart is this zombie figure with an open neck that appears after the Red Wedding. That was when a major assassination happened. And her existence pretty much is to show how shit things have gotten in like the Riverlands and up north and stuff. There are certain traditions in Game of Thrones that are held at a high order. Think of, Geneva type convention stuff. How there are certain things that you don't do during war, not necessarily for the moral implications, because of course these are your enemies and a lot of people in war don't give a damn as long as they win. But if you start doing it, then that also gives your enemy the excuse or permission to do the same thing back to you. So that's why you don't salt people's fields, because you don't want your field salted and to deal with that as well. But to kill somebody at a wedding, which is supposed to be a time of merriment, and when the gods are present and the union of families and stuff, and how it ended up becoming a major violation, that ends up offsetting the balance, and a lot of dark magic shit just start happening after that. And Lady Stoneheart is one of those consequences. But back to knighthood.
This title. I think the story of Hyle Hunt and the other knights of Renly's camp really show us a tale of knighthood perverted. Catelyn even dubs them the Knights of Summer, which I find to be a very interesting title with a lot of, nuance to dig into, but I think we'll save that for another video. And then we have Sandor Clegane, the Hound. Sandor is pointedly not a knight, and he does not want to be a knight because his brother is one and his brother is a monster. He has no respect for the title of knight and carries no grandeur of what knighthood is. Yet, he does do some incredibly knightly things while also doing some incredibly not knightly things. He's a hard guy to pin down. These 5 characters, including Dunk, are all very different, but their stories revolve around the people they do or do not choose to give their oaths and therefore their bodies to. And this is not too dissimilar from our sex worker characters in the main series. The 2 characters I want to focus on today are Shay and Pia. Pia is not a sex worker by tradition or in the traditional sense, but during the original Lannister invasion of Harrenhal, she does exchange her body seemingly like for protection or favor with the Lannister knights.
Mhm.
So for the purposes of the video, I would like to include her in the larger conversation, especially because of her and Shay's proximity to the War of the Five Kings. And also, like, kind of just as a blanket statement, it doesn't really seem like any woman in the story has ever really chosen to do sex work. Rather, they've been forced into it or groomed into it as a means of survival, which kind of makes everything more tragic. Some examples of this being Sarah from Fire and Blood, Alayaya, or the Sunset Girl. Pia is the first example we see of being punished for the side you pledge your body to. After the Lannister forces are ousted from Harrenhal, Roose.
Pause. That kind of reminds me, like, has anybody seen those videos or those pictures of like French women or like any woman who were in the countries of the Allied powers, and how after World War II was over, a lot of them ended up being branded or publicly ostracized for quote unquote giving their bodies to the enemies, even though, this is war. And this was also the depression right before the war, right? So like people need to eat. And even and sometimes they weren't even paid. Sometimes if you know damn well that your country was being sieged while you were going home, especially the British and the French and whatnot. So it's not guaranteed that there was even a monetary exchange because the soldiers even took over. And I wish that more people were willing to talk about some of the struggles of sex work in, I guess, not necessarily a nice way, because I don't think that people need to be nice when it comes to worker struggles, but like in a way that shows care towards those worker struggles without necessarily showing disdain for the person, right? Because, like, I don't think that, how to describe it. Remember when earlier I made it clear that I wanted to say prostitutes instead of sex work? Because even though sex work is a category of, it's a field category, no different from, say, education or the medical field and stuff. Sex work is a field. There are like stratifications within that field. And the conditions between being a cam girl versus a porn star versus a stripper versus a prostitute, they're very different. And the level of agency that you have when it comes to choosing those professions are very different. And some people would say that, oh, if you didn't have much of a choice, then it's not sex work, it's trafficking. But that's kind of antithetical to how I grew up, which isn't saying much of anything, because just because I grew up a certain way doesn't necessarily make me an expert. But how I learned is that trafficking is a labor issue, whereas, and therefore trafficking is still a form of work, even though it's forced, because like we live under capitalism. I don't think that people can truly say that we've chosen our jobs or our careers unless you're already rich and stuff, and there's like no negative consequences for not choosing or whatever. All work is mandatory, and not all work is inherently dignifying or voluntary and stuff, because we have no choice but to work to live. And in an attempt to try to remedy the reputations of sex workers, because people often reduce them to their victimhood whenever they do experience it. A lot of people don't like to talk about the unsavory parts of labor and stuff. Instead, they try to separate it instead of treating it as a field issue and addressing it directly. But I'm glad that in the context of at least this Game of Thrones discussion is being discussed and treated with some grace.
Punishes any women who slept with the opposing force. Air quotes, because I have a lot of doubts of how consensual this really could have been, and their punishment is to be put into sexual slavery. Pia in no way affects the course of the war, but she is punished more cruelly than a knight of the opposing side would be. Like, they literally have high ranking soldiers in nice quarters. But through these actions, Pia is seen as taking one side or another. And it's really only through the grace of Jaime Lannister, when the Lannisters retake Harrenhal, that she's not punished further. And yet I find this in strong contrast to Jaime's time in Harrenhal. And despite fighting for the Lannisters, Jaime is treated nice by Roos's men. And yes, that's because Roose is working with Tywin, but even then, we see when the Lannisters are taken over Harrenhal, then Wyman Manderly's sons are treated pretty well. They get to like walk around the castle somewhat. Like Arya has made some remarks of seeing them, and like they stay in nice quarters. And again, this is literally the opposing force. Jamie admittedly gets kind of treated like shit at River Run, but he also keeps trying to escape. His cousins are treated really nicely until, the Karstarks go off the edge. But still, they are treated nicely as hostages. So why doesn't Pia get this same treatment? Shay is another really heart.
And I know that this is a rhetorical question and stuff. I just wanted to I just want to run my mouth cuz like she's so right. Part of it is like I can't even say men because Brienne, despite being a woman and despite being singled out a lot in her field, she also gets the same kind of treatment as Jamie and other stuff. It's largely a class thing, right? Because even without the ties to prostitution, because she is specifically the small folk, Pia gets that treatment. I think about how in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, where Tanzel is also just doing her job. She's performing Tenzel Tutal. She's a puppeteer who provides, additional entertainment at the jousting event because, the joust and all of the other tourney stuff like the sword fighting and whatnot, those are extras. Those are like the main events. But of course, you have like the little sideshow games and the little performances and whatnot. Tanzel is a puppeteer, and she does a story of a knight fighting and defeating a dragon. And then there's an example made out of her because this took place after a major rebellion, the Blackfire Rebellion, where the Targaryens are about to, where somebody attempted to unseat the Targaryens in their position. And Tanzel's performance was treated as a problem because her show depicted the killing of a dragon, which is the Targaryen house sigil. So that was considered an act of war because of the symbolic killing of a dragon only a couple of years after a rebellion and stuff. The small folk aren't considered valuable and they're supposed to have undying loyalty to their territories and stuff, regardless of the situation, regardless of context and whatnot. Because both Tanzel and Pia were simply doing their job, and it's just taken as a personal affront. Whereas nobles, because noble houses, remember when I talked about Lady Stoneheart and the violation that was the Red Wedding and how so many shit went through the fan because whenever you do something as evil as the Red Wedding, then that gives your enemies permission to do that to you. These sides are willing to preserve the lives of nobles on the opposing side because they don't want it to be okay for their nobles to be killed. And it shows like the lack of consequences that go against hurting the small folk. Because Pia, she gets rewarded for her labor. Hey TD, I'm talking about A Night of the Seven Kingdoms because I wanted to just yap about like class disparities and sex work and how that plays into the show because there was like a specific scene that stood out to me. And I was watching this I'm watching this YouTuber break down some of these experiences and whatnot. But pretty much I'm talking about the differences made between nobles and the small folk in A Song of Ice and Fire because you know, consequences versus lack of consequences. There's a character named Pia who is a prostitute and she ends up quote unquote sleeping with the enemy, even though most likely there wasn't a choice in the matter because this is war and you gotta have food on the table and stuff. And she's punished for doing so versus, oh, hi, Bishy. How's it going? Damn, oh, yeah, my alerts are off. because I forgot to turn him back on after that one event. But welcome Raiders. My name is Jayla Cephidae, and I'm a mutant jellyfish VTuber who likes to yap and draw and talk about the media that I like. Right now, we're watching a video that is analyzing um the show and the book A Night of the Seven Kingdom, which is a spinoff of George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones. I'm getting back into Game of Thrones again, which is very unfortunate for. Actually, no, it's not unfortunate because like I'm not watching House of the Dragon. You can't make me like Targaryens enough to give a damn. Like I only like Dany and stuff. But this video specifically talks about the similarities and the disparities between being a knight versus being a sex worker because both roles deal with giving oneself for as an occupation. But they have Doctor Who riding dragons. That's true. However, um actually, there should be a clip, right? Of like, there's a character named Raymond Fossaway, and like the shit that he be saying about Targaryens is exactly how I feel about them. The abused women in that house do all of the fucking PR. I swear to God. What's his name? Raymond? He's just talking mad shit. Where is it? Is it this? I'm a fast forward, right?
So Duncan, I saw you earlier with this boy.
Yeah, this boy is my squire. Egg.
I heard Arian were in spitting rage at Lord Ashford for giving away his horse.
Little comfort that will be to Sir Humphrey. It looked as if he was going to carry the day.
Now his leg shattered like a baking dish.
My squire thinks Arian meant to kill them.
Hold on, I'm
They're
trying to find it.
incestuous aliens, Duncan. Blood magicers and tyrants who've burned our lands, enslaved our people, dragged us into their wars without a mote of respect for our history or our customs. Every pale-haired brat they saddled on us has been madder than the last. Gods know how. The only honourable thing a Targaryen
Do
can
not
do
look
for
at
this
the.
realm is finish on his wife's tits. So I think he meant to kill the fucking horse.
Okay, so don't pay attention to the captions too much because they're not accurate, and I don't know why. Like, bro, like fix the captions. However, Raymond's fucking right. The abused women in that house is doing all of the PR. Like, if it wasn't for Rihanna and Danny, no. And like people like Damon, who's played by what's his name? Matt Smith, who is one of the Doctor Who's. And he do got swagger. However, fuck the Targaryens. Fuck them dragons. If it wasn't for them doing a fucking civil war, we wouldn't have had White Walkers showing up again. Because it was literally the dragons that was keeping the whites away. Only for the Targaryens to fuck all that shit up. And then now we gotta deal with White Walkers again because they're not doing what they're supposed to do.
Breaking example of this comparison. Shay is a camp follower, and during a Game of Thrones, she is claimed by Tyrion. She plays the role of girlfriend for Tyrion. She fulfills his fantasies, she listens to his worries, and she performs the duty she is paid to do. She is doing a job, and Tyrion himself knows this, but allows the delusion.
Yeah, it's funny as fuck because shit. Especially apparently in recent seasons, like I don't watch House of the Dragon because I don't care to. But there's been a lot of Valyrian supremacy speeches going on, apparently. It's crazy.
Of it being
Bananas.
real to keep him from letting her go. The relationship between Shay and Tyrion is extremely transactional, and there are multiple times that Tyrion pushes the boundaries of that relationship through sleeping with Shay when she's asleep, or even hitting her when she dares to push against one of his decisions. Tyrion feels that he owns Shay, as a nobleman feels that he might own his own wife, and he even fantasizes about one day marrying her. So when Shay shatters this illusion, it breaks him, because not only does she shatter it, but she has another job and plays that role just as well. Shay is bought by Cersei and Tywin, and while we don't know the specifics of this interaction, we have to imagine that Shay had no real power in this situation. I mean, Tywin is the hand of the king and the richest man in all of Westeros, and Cersei is the Dowager Queen, as well as the Queen Regent at this time. So you best believe she's gonna do a super duper fucking great job at whatever they ask her to do. Yet Tyrion sees this as betrayal and kills Shay for being with Tywin, the opposing side. There are other examples of sex workers being blamed and hurt for things that have really nothing to do with them. Alayaya is a great example of this. Alayaya is a sex worker that is groomed into sex work by her mother, the owner of the brothel, and she serves as Tyrion's cover throughout A Clash of Kings to go and see Shay. She's wrongly assumed by Cersei to be Tyrion's girlfriend sex worker that he always goes to see, and therefore is used to hurt Tyrion. She is beaten and brought before Tyrion bloody and crying as kind of like this punishment by proxy for Tyrion to keep Tyrion in line by Cersei after she feels threatened by Tyrion. But why Alayaya? Why does she have to be this proxy? Why couldn't it be someone like Pod, who is Tyrion's squire, or Bronn, who is the sellsword that got Tyrion out of many of his messes and is
Because Cersei is a fucking bird. Like, okay, it is so frustrating because Cersei is a really good character. I say that she's a lot better in the show because she's more rounded out. Because unfortunately, Cersei in the books, because she is only depicted through the POV of other characters until I think A Feast of Crows, um, she's not really she's mostly one dimensional and stuff because the only side that other POVs get to see her as is vapid and hateful and messy as hell. And unfortunately that is, even when she's rounded out, that's still what she is at her core. The show helped because in film it's easier to show multiple POVs and stuff at multiple times and whatnot. And because voiced some regrets about not rounding out her edges sooner, he ended up fixing that in the show with some of the script writing. But oh my god, in the books and even in the show, she's fucking terrible towards other women. And it's partially because, like, despite being a noble woman and honestly being able to bully anybody who isn't her husband, um, at the end of the day, she's still a woman, right? And unfortunately, the only people that women can consistently be terrible towards are other women because of lateral oppression and children because they are they're the patrons of the home. They're in charge of child rearing. So because children are directly under them, and those are the only folks that they can consistently punch over. But Cersei's whole thing is, instead of being hateful towards misogyny, because like misogyny is a terrible thing, her thing is that she hates it because she wasn't spared from it. It's why she often takes to Jamie and whatnot, because she sees Jamie as an ideal version of herself, which is essentially a male version of herself. She's the oldest sibling, period, amongst the Lannister siblings. And she feels robbed of her position because of her gender. So she takes to Jamie because that's the closest way to manhood that she could have by sort of proxy. And she often asserts her authority by going after women. That's why she kills Robert's bastards as like, and also kills their mothers and whatnot when Joffrey's rule gets threatened as a means to assert that. And she's always giving Qyburn, which was that maester that does the weird experiments, he always gives him little girls and women to experiment on. And then in later books, when she's like going through her Mad Queen arc after being embarrassed and shit, she like takes women into the room and starts beating on them and shit.
kind
She's
of
a
like
bird.
his man on the inside. Why is Alayaya, a woman who is just doing her job, the one to face this brutality? You could really make the argument that Bronn is the one that is bolstering Tyrion and, like, enabling more of his behaviors. Tywin forces his father's mistress, another sex worker, to do the
Have a
walk
good
of
day,
shame to
Bishy.
Casterly Rock because she dared pledge her body
Go
to
get them.
Tytos and accept gifts. God forbid! The sex workers who slept with Robert Baratheon are punished and have their children killed by Cersei because they are threats to Cersei's illegitimate children. All of these women are put in the same danger, if not worse danger, than knights in war. Game of Thrones show-only characters like Raz only exist to be exploited, sexualized while Littlefinger waxes about Catelyn for some reason, and then brutally killed. Raz's fate is to be killed by Joffrey after Tyrion sends her to him to, like, blow off steam, and then we see her dead. Because,
You know, the worst
we
part about it, that
totally
wasn't
needed
even in the
another
book.
example of how brutal and cruel Joffrey was. That wasn't already fucking clear. Another show-only character is Sylvie from House of the Dragon, who I talked about last video. Sylvie is a sex worker who is forced to sexually abuse Aemon when he is only 13 years old. Some people in the fandom refer to her as Aemon's abuser, given their age difference. But I would push back on this because when Prince Aegon Targaryen pays a common woman to do something, I don't think she really has much choice in that matter. Aegon is Aemon's abuser. He holds power over him, and definitely over Sylvie, and he holds the power to force this abuse by proxy. When Joffrey orders the Kingsguard to beat Sansa, do we call them her abusers, or do we call Joffrey her abusers?
So here's my thing about there's a difference between the sex worker and the Kingsguard. Even though the Kingsguard um are Joffrey's subordinate, the Kingsguard, for the most part, they're also complicit in abuse because you see some of these behaviors. What's his name? Janos Slint is in charge of the City Watch, but there's like another dude. Damn, I forgot these dudes' name because I didn't fully read the books, but like I know that when Jamie comes back after being injured and stuff, he starts cleaning up the Kingsguard and rearranging things because he knows that his brothers in arms are like hella incompetent and shit. Even though they're doing this to serve Joffrey, there's like a culture of chauvinism and abuse within the Kingsguard that they often participate with as well, and some of them enjoy that shit. So I can't fully say that the knights aren't abusers themselves. Like, yeah, they're following orders, but they're having a good time while doing it, and that's different.
Do we recognize the power imbalance in this situation? If a knight with title and influence can't say no to a king, how the hell would a common woman be able to say no to a prince? Now, one could say that yes, they are at fault, and they could give up their titles as knights of the Kingsguard. But could Sylvie really give up her only profession in this world, her only source of money, the only small bit of power that she has? And yes, I could relent and say that Sylvie, as the proprietor, as the owner of this brothel, in some ways does perpetuate abuse, through continuing this cycle of sexual slavery. But also, we see through Mazaria that the minute that is taken away, the minute that Mazaria's brothel is burnt down, she's brought back to no status. It's only through Rhaenyra's, like of her guidance and company that she holds any power, and she's not just sent to the bottom of the gutters. Because at the end of the day, the women of Westeros can't just walk away from the established institution of sexual slavery. This rot of sexual slavery even sinks into Westerosi marriages. Cersei describes in detail in A Feast for Crows the abuse she faces from Robert and even Jaime. Robert sexually and physically abuses Cersei, treating her no differently than a sex worker would be treated. Honestly, you could even make the argument that she's treated worse than the sex workers that Robert goes to. I mean, look at the reverence that Bara has for Robert, the love that she has for Robert. Cersei gets none of that. And Jaime treats Cersei better than Robert? Yeah, but also feels like this entitlement to her. Their relationship is mutually toxic. I'm not going to say that it's not, but it's interesting to take a moment to view the toxicity through Jaime's side. Jaime treats Cersei as a wife, thus, he feels the same entitlement to her and her body. And in
Mm.
turn, Cersei uses this
Yeah, and this is something frustrating to talk about in the fandom sometimes because I love Jamie. Jamie is one of my favorite characters in the franchise because of how dynamic his character arc is, but Jamie for all intents and purposes ain't shit. And if he is going to go through with his redemption arc, there's always going to be like this nagging thing at the back of the head because Jamie has wronged a lot of people, and one of the people that he has wronged was his sister. Unfortunately, well, I don't want to say unfortunately because like I do need to acknowledge, and I say unfortunately sometimes because I fucking can't stand Cersei, but because she's one of those characters where it's like experience is not a teacher. She can go through all of these things and she goes in detail, and yet she is a hateful ass nigga herself, and she constantly goes out of her way to put other women through that she endures or through similar experiences that she endures. And that's why I can't stand her compared to other female characters who are POV in Game of Thrones. But like at the end of the day, she's like that because of the victimization that's like so rampant in the Lannister household. And Jamie did have a hand in that, and he's responsible. Like I think about how when Cersei first got her fortune reading, and she ends up killing a girl who was told that she was going to marry a Lannister and stuff, thinking that the girl was going to get with her brother and stuff. And it's just a hot ass mess. It's just a hot ass mess.
to manipulate Jaime. One of my mutuals on Twitter pointed out a really interesting parallel that Cersei doesn't want to have sex in the Sept because it's where Joffrey is, and I think she still does have some weird religious stuff going on, but Jaime kind of pushes it forward until Cersei relents. But when Cersei wants to have sex in the White Sword Tower, Jaime says no. And he pushes her away and he rebukes her because this is a place that is sacred for him. I think that shows a clear imbalance. And now, obviously, there's like other things going on in the scene and more things have happened and blah, blah, blah. But I just think it's an interesting thing to look at. And it's really hard to talk about Cersei and talk about the abuse that she faces because, yes, she is evil in a lot of ways and she's really morally flawed. But because of this, people think that she deserves this abuse. I mean, open up any comment section about Cersei or Robert Baratheon, and you see people laughing about how he hits her and how she deserves it. Yeah, it's really bad. And this is not to downplay the sexual abuse that Cersei then does to Lancel and kind of the horrifying ramifications that it has on Lancel's mental health. Obviously, that's really awful. But Cersei, in a way, is punished by the church for sleeping with Lancel, but no punishment will ever find Robert or Jaime for what they've done to Cersei unless it was done by her own hand. Daenerys is sold to Khal Drogo at the beginning of A Game of Thrones and spends most of the book being a bridal slave. Her body is seen as a bargaining tool for her older brother, and despite what a lot of people in the fandom like to say, she doesn't have really any agency in this marriage. Daenerys again has to give up her sexual agency and marry his Dar and then dance with dragons to kind of broker this temporary peace. Sansa, through her marriage to Tyrion, is sexually assaulted, and she is spared the worst fate that Daenerys and Cersei get, but only because Tyrion wants to curb his darker desires. The Sunset Girl does not receive such graces, I would like to point out. Unless we forget to speak about poor Jane Poole. Nobility, although from a lower house, does not protect her from being sent to a brothel to work. When she is no longer under the protection.
Bro, we gotta kill Littlefinger. Like I don't think what's crazy, right? Is that David and Daniel, they do adapt the Jane Pool thing, but instead they put it onto Sansa, and it's just something disgusting about that for a couple of reasons. This isn't to say that it's more disgusting because it happens to Sansa, because what Ramsay does, or what the Boltons do in general, it's gross no matter who it happens to. But like, one thing about Littlefinger in Game of Thrones. Oh hey, Siren So True. Welcome. We're watching a Game of Thrones video, and it's talking about um it was talking about a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms at first, but then it ended up shifting to talking about the plight of sex workers and sex work adjacent positions in Game of Thrones, and pretty much drawing the similarities of like excuse me, of like being property of upper noblemen in the world, and how that manifests in different ways. If we could put a rank of like quote unquote being owned by a nobleman, the best position to be is probably a knight. And then after that is maybe a wife, and maybe a sex worker after that. Although wife and sex workers, they tend to flip flop depending on the noble and stuff. It's just a lot of nuances. Part of the reason why I'm watching this video, partially because I was putting it on the back burner, but also A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms ended up getting Emmy nominated, and I like how this creator mentioned a scene that stood out to me, and I'll play the scene in a few minutes actually. And there's also been conversations about a rapper named C China. She's a rapper from Essex, and I'll get into that later because I didn't fully jump into that, because the situation with her is making me think on this situation, or making me think on this area in the piece of media a lot. The back of the bus. Yeah, I'm in the back of the car with your daddy, and he's twerking and popping a perk. That's C China. Because some stuff's been going on with her recently, and I'm not a big fan of like some of the commentary concerning it. But we're gonna finish this video, and I'm gonna yap some more, and then I'll talk about it.
Action of House Stark. Jane is punished for being a pool, a vassal house of House Stark. She is then used as a pawn. She is sold off to the Boltons as fake Arya Stark, where she is forced to endure the absolute epitome of horrors of a Westerosi marriage. She is forced to live her life as a bridal slave, not unlike Daenerys. Jane is at the whims of Ramsay's cruelty, and she's even warned by Theon to not reveal her true nature when they run away to Stannis' army, lest she only be seen as a whore. She has less protection than a knight of her same ranking would be granted, through actions that she had no agency or choice in. Throughout the story, we are shown that even high-born noble ladies are not safe from the threat of sexual violence when they no longer have the protection of a man. The idea of sending Alicent and Helena to a brothel to live out their days as brothel queens is floated by Rhaenyra's cohort. Now, whether this idea actually was floated or not is hard to say, given the nature of Fire and Blood's kind of propagandized writing and like unreliable narrators, but nonetheless, the idea is really fucking horrifying. This sort of cruelty is only ever directed towards women. Aemon or Gwaine Hightower would never be sold into sexual slavery. Another prime example of this cruel and tragic fate is Elia Martell, whose only crime was being married to a Targaryen prince and being seen as in the way by Tywin Lannister. Noble women are only safe when they have the protection of their male counterparts. But once that is stripped away, they are
Earlier in the video, I did talk about how Brienne is treated a little bit differently because of her being a knight. Because when the video briefly mentioned Lady Stoneheart, I was talking about why um because first the YouTuber, she talked about how, knights, they at most get a slap on the wrist for being on the opposing side, And I mostly treated it as a class thing because of how Brienne was treated for quote unquote being on the opposing side and stuff. She's in a weird position, right? Because even though she's a knight, she's still a woman, and her whole thing is dealing with that dichotomy and stuff. When Lady Stoneheart is like this undead creature that emerges from the Riverlands after the Red Wedding, which is when a major assassination attempt happens at a wedding. And pretty much that's to show, and I say this undead creature because like she's literally undead and she's going around like hanging people who were associated with the Red Wedding, and that's supposed to show magical ramifications of doing pretty much a terrorist plot like that. Because think of the Geneva Conventions, right? The reason why we have the Geneva Conventions is because whenever you do war crimes and these heinous acts during war, that pretty much gives permission for your enemy to do that to you. And nobody wants to go through that because of like the issues with things from rebuilding and morale and stuff. It's just a logistical nightmare to deal with. So, in order to keep people from dealing with that mutually assured destruction, we have these rules set in place. So, well, in Game of Thrones, they also have magical backing for those rules. Like when you violate a wedding, you can literally end up with a curse and have a revenant walking around hanging people and shit. And I was thinking about how even though Brienne and Jamie, because she mentioned how Jamie, when he was captured by enemy soldiers, he was still put into a high position, but like he's a noble. Nobles aren't going to suffer the consequences for working for an opposing side, at least not unless they're the person in charge, because usually the person in charge is going to get executed, right? Nobles usually are going to get a slap on the wrist at most because other nobles don't want to be killed for doing the same thing. But when you're a part of the small folk, which is what most sex workers in that world are, most if not all of them, then of course there's no consequences for it. Like, oh, if you kill one of my small folk, I'm just gonna kill one of yours. Nobody gives a fuck. And that's why I mentioned Brienne. But then Brienne, she's also in a weird spot because she is uniquely humiliated and stuff. Because at the end of the day, she's still a woman.
No safer than any of the small folk women from the cruelty and depravity of Westeros. We see this clearly through Arya's chapters as well, as she faces near constant threats of assault while she masquerades as a common girl throughout A Clash of Kings and A Storm of Swords. Arya's lack of rank means that she is constantly abused, and threats of sexual violence are thrown at her nearly every chapter. In the Wars of Westeros, we receive the inner workings of many knights, how they feel, how they think, and who they give their hearts to. But we can't say the same for women like Pia or Shay. Their voices aren't heard and they'll never receive the justice they deserve. Shay and Elia are dead. Jane and Pia, while they may heal, will never get true retribution for what happened to them. Knighthood and sex work inhabit the story and serve as a framework for so many characters. And yet knighthood will always receive a shining light, while sex workers and the abused fall into the background or the footnotes of tragedy. A knight can be redeemed, but an abused woman can only be put out of her misery or suffer in silence. So what can be done? Is the status quo unchangeable? A Song of Ice and Fire, despite its dark moments, is a story of hope. Many of our main POV characters are of a new generation, the shining hope, the dream of spring that come when the winds of winter blow. And many of them are young girls, with agency, strength, and love in their hearts. One of Daenerys' driving goals in the story, and where we leave her in A Dance with Dragons, is to avenge Iroe, a girl who was sexually abused and then killed when Khal Drogo's Khalasar fell apart at the hands of Cal Jocko. When we pick up Daenerys' story, we will see her enact this revenge and continue her abolitionist movement throughout Essos and into Westeros. Arya, a champion of women and the small folk, will obviously not let this treatment of Jane masquerade as her at the hands of House Bolton slide. I wouldn't even be surprised if she got to meet up with some of Jon's free folk and start to take on their views of gender. Arya, in my opinion, is destined for leadership, and I think it's one that will shake up the gendered norms of Westeros. Sansa will end the cycle of violence with Lysa, Littlefinger, and herself. Sansa is a foil to her Aunt Lysa and Cersei, who both turned into abusers from their marriages and their lots in life. Sansa herself is going to become the lady that she's always wanted to see in this world, and she will have her true knight, Brienne. Brienne herself was confirmed by
Okay,
George R. R.
because
Martin
let me pause because I was finna be. I'm still kind of tilted at this video, and I'll go into why.
in a panel during 2025's New York Comic Con that she will be knighted in the future. I think this will be a historic moment that will reshape the future of knighthood because change is coming and a new dawn will rise. And hopefully, it's a kinder one to those who are most vulnerable. But this current narrative is not unlike our own, and I'd love to end this video highlighting some charities and different organizations that support those vulnerable workers in this world that is not forgiving to them yet loves to exploit them. Look in the description below for links to support or donate to these causes. And if you want to hear more analysis about A Song of Ice and Fire's books and their show adaptations and maybe even other media in the future, please consider subscribing to this channel. Throw this video a like, leave a comment about what you want to see next, all the good stuff. But until then, see you later.
Okay, so this is a good video, and I like that it really drives home um some of the plights of the what is it, the unique social position, but I can't even say unique because of how she draws parallels between prostitution versus knighthood versus even being a wife, and how there's plenty of feminist writings and whatnot that deal with how being a wife and a prostitute are really two sides of the same coin because of the notions of ownership and stuff, and that sacrifice of with knighthood. But I wish that she brought up Brienne more, because Brienne as a character, because she is a female knight, she is that medium between the two, and how in a way she really flip-flops between that experience. The first thing that came to mind when I see that scene where Sir Duncan Natal and the three camp chasers, particularly Rowan, because she ends up showing up the most frequent, um, is Brienne's quote of when she's talking to Catelyn Stark. I'll actually find it. Give me just a minute to find it. I thought she was gonna talk about Brienne sort of um I thought she was going to talk about Brienne's scene when she's like talking to Catelyn. Okay, so this is like the opening scene where Dunk meets the ladies because he's at the tourney and he's trying to find a lord to like verify that he's a knight.
It's a hedge night, ain't it?
What?
It's like a night, but sadder.
No, I'm not
It's got to
sad.
sleep in the hedges because no lord will have it.
Aw.
That is sad. Goodbye.
Yeah. Iris.
Damn, it's only that clip. Shit. There's like another scene where he meets them in the tents, but maybe it's not on there because either somebody didn't see it as something to clip, or or maybe because there's too much titty in there. I low-key gotta read the books. I've only read the shows. To be honest, I gotta read the books because I just be listening to recaps, like really, really long recaps, and the folks that I listen to are refutable sources. because they be going into details with these damn recap. It's like Comic Storian, but Game of Thrones. I miss Comic Storian. But there's this scene where he goes to the tent and the ladies in there tell him to take care of his body and stuff because it's the only ones that he got. Because there's that threat of death, even in something as quote unquote harmless as attorney, because it's a sport, but it's an extreme sport and stuff, and the threat of death that comes before even the big conflict happens. But I really wanted her to talk about Brienne more because I think of that one scene in A Clash of Kings, which gets talked about both in the show and in the books, where Catelyn Stark is talking to Brienne and asking her why she became a knight and stuff. Because she's just like, is dying in battle worth having a song written about you? And Brienne's just like, many of women die in childbirth, but no songs are written about them. And it shows how, in a way, Brienne becomes a knight to like elevate her station because it's better. Just like how what's her name? Because I keep saying the YouTuber, but like she got a name. Just like Holly Bean talks about the plight of women in Game of Thrones and how there's a clear difference in how women and knights, and I say women and knights because like wives, I'm putting wives and prostitutes in the same category, right? Because they go through the same thing, two sides of the same coin, right? How women and knights are treated differently in that society and stuff, even if you're elevated to a noble position. Brienne is like that weird um transition between the two. And that quote that she made about um the thing about songs being written for knights versus being written for women who die in childbirth. It stood out to me, and I was easily reminded of it when Dunk was talking to the ladies and they were telling him to take care of them, taking care of himself, because he's often paralleled with different small folk struggles. But I'm gonna turn on some music. The reason why I ended up watching this video, because it was talking about the issues that come with having to sacrifice your body for survival, was because of the conversations surrounding Sea China. So for those who don't know, Sea China, or I don't, is that how you pronounce her name? Because I'm the kind of person who's like, if I don't hear it out loud, then I'm not gonna know. Like I know how to sound out. I was hooked on phonics as a child, but some names aren't like intuitive, and she's British, so they pronounce certain things differently. But C China is a rapper from Essex, and her most famous piece is Peggy, where she's talking about pegging grown men in the back of the bus and shit. Um, so recently, she's doing all right now, but recently, like as in within the past couple of days, she OD'd, like she overdosed. And on her Instagram stories, she posted a scripture, right? Like it was just a simple scripture. Like you go through a near life or death situation and you pray, or you listen to scripture and stuff. Cuz if even if you're not religious, right? Some people, even when they leave the church or the mosque or whatever, some things just stay with you because it's not just a belief thing, it's a cultural thing. So people maintain certain habits and stuff. And people are going crazy about it on Twitter. They're talking about, oh, we're going to lose C China to religious psychosis because she posted a scripture after she just OD'd. When some people still quote certain scriptures as words of comfort. And I can talk about my personal experience, right? I haven't been to church in months because I don't like church people. They get on my fucking nerves. The setting is annoying as fuck because of how people can be a bunch of backbiting bitches. Like church is literally just Twitter, but with scriptures attached, right? It. I've been to too many churches where it's just full of nothing but backbiting bitches who are like greedy and stuff. And it's sad because like being a black person and being a black person who likes history and music and stuff, I acknowledge the black church as like an institution that helped foster change with like abolition and the civil rights movement. And then it is like the biggest influence of modern music ever because niggas didn't have access to music education, and that was like one of the few places where we could learn and hone the craft and stuff. But it's so rampant with abuse and ignorance, and I just don't want to be bothered. Like, I can praise the Lord at home if I feel like it. And that's like sad because when it comes to stuff you don't want to be isolated. You want to be able to be in touch with community and get access to a variety of information, but there's certain things that I'm just not willing to deal with just to deal with that. But no, people are like, "Oh, we're losing C China to religious psychosis and stuff." And I fucking hate that term. Like throwing the word psychosis around to call somebody crazy. Just call them crazy. Like people are using all of these big words that they don't even understand just to call somebody crazy. And it's just like a very ableist way to describe somebody. Let me see. Um I wouldn't say that I'm religious, but I have grown up in the church and I still go with my mom sometimes because I'm cool with most people in my church, but people will see an inch and go a mile with religion. Yeah. And like some people are just so fucking hateful. And it's like, mind your business and stop being a dickhole. But especially to mind your business stuff because so many people will like always have something to say about your life, but they're not doing anything to help foster it. And it's just like if you're not contributing, then shut the hell up. But it's kind of bothering me with even non-religious people having that same kind of behavior. And that's why I say a lot of people are culturally Christian. I also mean that in the negative sense. Like there's the culturally Christian where you still pray before you eat even if you're an atheist, but then there's also the culturally Christian when you're still a backbiting bitch. And that's how I feel about the C China situation. Because like they're like, oh my god, we lost the baddie. She's not gonna be pegging niggas in the back of the bus anymore because she's being proper and stuff. One First of all, she just quoted a scripture on Instagram. We don't know what her religious affiliation is, and I don't think that is anybody's business. Like personally, I don't care because I wasn't here for her personal life anyway. I was here for her music. But also like yeah, people need to leave her alone. But also like it's bothering me that people are being like we lost the baddie. Mind you, C China is 22 years old. And if you've listened to all three of her songs, like her songs are about crapping on, the toxic masculinity in hip hop spaces and stuff, but it also briefly touches on her personal experiences. Cause what was it? See, China has a song called "Legal Baby," which is talking about her, being freshly an adult and how she's gonna run these niggas' pockets and stuff. And all these men, all they want to do is fuck, so she might as well get paid off of it. And C China has been open about her experiences with having to start sex work, like right out of high school at the age of 18. And it just pisses me off when people are like, "Oh, we lost the baddie." But it's just like, are you housing the baddies? Are you hiring the baddies? This girl had to sell ass to survive right out of high school. And she's clearly venting about these frustrations in her music, which is why she's just like, fuck these dudes. I'm gonna run their pockets and I'm gonna sit on their face because they ain't shit. Because these grown ass men trying to hunch on her at a young age when what she really needed was some resources and shit. And people are mad that she could be possibly turned into Jesus when y'all not even being people that she could turn to in the community so she could still be a baddie, but be a baddie in a safer way. You know, like it's always, oh, we lost the baddie. We're losing baddies because you're not taking care of them. You're not protecting them. You're not teaching the baddies because she had to drop out of college and stuff. You're not hiring them. You're not housing the baddies. So let's say that C China does decide to, I don't know, become a born again Christian. And that's assuming that she stopped practicing. There are porn stars who wear crucifixes. Like I remember how on Twitter there was like this one video where it was like an interview, or it was either an interview or a Twitter post where this one cam girl, she was a porn star. She was just like, "Yeah, I always wear my cross on me because I want to protect myself from demons." And somebody was just like, "But you're a porn star. You're around demons all the time and da 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 da." When it's just like, "Bitch, that's none of your business." And yeah, maybe that's why she's wearing the crucifix, dumbass. She knows she's around demons all the time, and that's why she stays prayed up. Like I don't know, and I don't care. It's not my business, right? We're losing baddies because they're not safe. Like y'all want people to be baddies, actually be people to be baddies around. Make the environment safe for baddies. It was like that when, and the reason why I'm saying, are you hiring the baddies and stuff? I'm actually quoting, I can't remember the name of the TikTok, but there was this one trans woman who was talking about how she was tired of people saying protect the dolls because it feels very disingenuous. Because, like, a lot of trans women, especially the ones who end up dying as adults, a lot of them are sex workers because unfortunately workspaces are so discriminatory that um you have no choice but to do certain things just to get through the day and survive, right? And that's why earlier during stream I was talking about how some conversations concerning sex work can feel disingenuous when people talk about like choice and empowerment and whatnot. Like people are like, sex work has the highest amount of minorities in there. And when you say it like that, it makes it sound like sex work is very inclusive of marginalized groups. Cause like the field has a high percentage of like trans people, disabled people, and people of color in there. But that's not really true because I've seen black cam girls talk about stratifications and how much they get paid, like how many subscribers they get paid compared to like white models and stuff. Plus size models have talked about how they don't get as much attention and stuff as skinny models because this is the sex industry. So you're going to deal with stuff like desirability and beauty standards. Yeah, it has a high percentage of minorities, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's kind or safe for minorities. It's more like marginalized people get pushed from so many opportunities that more often than not they have no choice but to pick up the camera or to walk the streets and stuff to make sure that their bills are paid. But no, how this trans woman on TikTok is just like, y'all keep saying protect the dolls and stuff, but it's just like hire the dolls. Dolls, that's a term for black trans women, right? Hire the dolls, house the dolls, feed the dolls. We wouldn't need, we as in trans woman, I'm not a trans woman, I'm Xeno. But we wouldn't need that protection, endangering ourselves just to pay the bills if people were willing to actually give us like community infrastructure and stuff. And the same thing can be applied to baddies. Are you hiring the baddies? Are you feeding the baddies? Are you giving the baddies an education? It's like that one meme where it's like, now draw her getting an education. You know that meme where it's just like, how do you want me to draw this character and stuff? Instead of now draw her with her toes out. Now draw her doing her taxes and stuff because she actually has enough money to get a tax refund, you know? And stuff like that. But that's pretty much the main subjects that I wanted to talk about. I'm probably going to cut this stream short, partially because it's storming terribly outside, and I don't want the stream to like end in the middle of me talking, and also because my throat low key hurts. Like I was coughing earlier, and even though the coughing has gone down because I took some medicine and shit, I don't want to like end up in a coughing fit. So we're gonna raid out to someone. We're gonna raid out to a friend, and I'm gonna end so I can rest my throat and chill out for the rest of the night. I wanted to draw, but nah, I'm good. But let's see. Thank you all for those who came and listened to me yap. I know that this is a different format from what I usually do, cause I usually just draw something and then I just yap about shit that I wrote down, like different topics that I wrote down for the week. But I just wanted to do something impromptu, and also my throat hurts, so it's gonna be cut short anyways. And usually, whenever I do drawing streams, as long as fuck. So maybe I'll try more in the future to like pick a video to react to and analyze and stuff. But until then, stay above the water. We're gonna go raid Plush Poppy as soon as I spell them out. Eventually, I'm gonna learn how to like put buttons on my stream deck where I can just automatically have the command in so I don't have to type this shit out manually cuz good lord, that's annoying. But let's go raid. Let's go say hi to Plush. Y'all have a good night. Stay above the water.